I can still feel the weight in my chest from that morning, the moment she uttered the words that shattered my world. We were sitting at the breakfast table, sunlight spilling across half-finished plates, when my wife, my partner of 10 years, looked at me with calm finality and said she wanted a divorce. No anger. No tears. Just a resigned determination that left me breathless and grasping for anything solid. Then, without pause, she told me I should speak to her new husband. Her new husband. At first I thought I'd misheard, that my mind was playing cruel tricks. But her expression never wavered, and my heart pounded with a force that threatened to tear me apart. I didn't understand how or when my life had unraveled, only that it had, and that the next step in this nightmare was a conversation I never imagined I'd have. The echo of her words lingered like a stubborn migraine as she left the table. I was too stunned to move, let alone follow her. Her new husband, the phrase repeated in my head in a loop. We weren't even officially divorced, and already she referred to someone else as her husband. My mind reeled with questions. How long? Who is he? Why now? But none of them found a voice. Instead, I just sat there, coffee gone cold, scrambled eggs congealing on my plate, trying to make sense of a betrayal I'd never seen coming. We'd been married for a decade. A decade. 10 years of shared laughter, minor quarrels that usually ended in exhausted apologies, weekend getaways to the mountains, and quiet nights curled on our worn leather couch. Sure, we'd had our rough patches. Every marriage does. Lately, she'd seemed distant, but I chalked it up to job stress or some personal struggle she wasn't quite ready to share. I never suspected she was planning a complete exit from our life. Now it was all out in the open. The divorce, the existence of another man, a whole new chapter she'd been writing behind my back. That morning, after she left the kitchen, I did the only thing that felt remotely sensible. I cleared the plates and washed the dishes by hand. The routine steadied me. The warmth of the water, the smell of dish soap, even the clinking of porcelain against stainless steel, it was all so mundane, so pitifully normal. But it gave me a moment to breathe, to keep from collapsing under the weight of her revelations. When the dishes were done, I dried my hands and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. The face that stared back looked haunted, with lines of shock etched around hollow eyes. I felt older, weaker, like a man who'd just lost a battle he didn't even realize he was fighting. She emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, duffel bag in hand, and paused by the front door. I wanted to speak, to demand explanations, to plead or rage or anything, but no words came. Without meeting my gaze, she told me she'd be in touch once the papers were ready, and that I should expect a call from him, the man who was now her husband. Then she left, shutting the door quietly behind her. The soft click of the latch felt like a guillotine dropping, separating everything I knew from the disorienting present I was stuck with. I stood in the middle of the living room trying to remember how to breathe. My body reacted before my mind did, sending me stumbling to the couch as though I'd been physically struck. I sat there for what felt like hours, head in my hands, until the afternoon light shifted across the walls. My phone buzzed sporadically, work emails probably, or maybe messages from friends I'd been neglecting. The trivial normalcy of it all was infuriating. Didn't the world know my life had just imploded? Eventually, I mustered the energy to move. I wandered the house like a ghost, noticing things I'd once overlooked. Scuff marks on the hardwood floor, half-burned candles on the mantel, the fading smell of her perfume in the bedroom. That particular scent triggered a wave of grief so intense that I had to lean against the dresser to steady myself. I thought about lying down, but the bed we once shared felt like a betrayal in itself. So I paced from room to room, searching for anything that would anchor me in a reality that felt increasingly surreal. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer it. My pulse quickened and a sickening dread churned in my stomach. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the phone to my ear, bracing myself for a voice that would confirm my worst fears. Hello? The greeting on the other end was calm, measured, almost polite. I could hear an edge of uncertainty, but also a quiet confidence that made me clench my jaw. Is this her husband? I mean, her ex-husband or soon-to-be? I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to lash out. I suppose I am, I said quietly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Who is this? He paused, and in that silence I could almost feel him wrestling with how to introduce himself. Finally he said, My name is David. She asked me to speak with you. David. Such a simple name for the man who'd apparently stolen my wife. There was no malice or smugness in his tone, though I half expected it. Instead, he sounded cautious, like he was stepping onto a battlefield he didn't want to be part of. But the battlefield was my life, and I was the one left holding the broken pieces. I'd prefer to do this in person, David continued. I know it's awkward, but it's what she wanted. Maybe we can meet somewhere neutral? I stared at the wall, feeling a sudden wave of anger. She wanted? How dare she lay out instructions for how we'd handle the fallout of her betrayal? But the anger dissipated quickly into a weary resignation. Fine, I heard myself say. Where do you want to meet? We settled on a cafe downtown near the courthouse. My choice. I liked the idea of having people around, witnesses in case I lost my composure. After the call ended, I sank back onto the couch, replaying the conversation in my head. David sounded normal. Civil. I hated that. I wanted him to be a villain, someone I could despise with every fiber of my being. Yet in those few minutes of speaking, he seemed subdued, almost apologetic. That, in a twisted way, made me feel worse. If he'd been cruel or mocking, I could have fueled my anger. But now I was stuck with a man who might actually be decent, just playing a part in a story I never agreed to. The next day I barely slept. My mind was a whirl of possibilities. Would he try to justify what they'd done? Would he keep details vague to spare me more pain or be brutally honest? Part of me dreaded learning the truth, while another part ached for it. By morning I was bleary-eyed and jumpy, craving coffee but too anxious to drink more than a few sips. As the clock inched toward noon, I forced myself to shower and dress in something that didn't look like I'd been living in it for weeks. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked haggard, eyes ringed with sleeplessness, jaw set too tight. But I told myself I could do this. I had to. The cafe was bustling with the lunch crowd. I arrived early and snagged a corner booth, hoping the noise and movement might give me a sense of anonymity. People laughed and chatted around me, the smell of espresso and baked goods mingling in the air. For a moment, I envied their simplicity, their ability to enjoy a mundane afternoon while my life teetered on the edge of disaster. 10 minutes later, David walked in. I recognized him immediately from the picture she once showed me, though at the time she'd claimed he was just a co-worker. He was tall, neatly dressed in a way that suggested he'd put thought into his appearance. Unlike me, who felt rumpled no matter what I wore, David carried himself with a subdued confidence. When our eyes met, he hesitated, then made his way to my table, weaving through the crowd. Thanks for agreeing to this, he said quietly as he slid into the seat opposite me. Up close, I noticed faint worry lines across his brow, a subtle sign that he might not be entirely at ease either. I shrugged, unable to find a polite response. My heart hammered in my chest, but my voice came out steadier than I expected. I'm here because she asked me to come. Let's get this over with. He nodded, folding his hands on the table. A waitress approached, but we both declined to order anything, tension hanging thick in the air. Then David exhaled, meeting my gaze. I'm sorry, he began, his tone subdued. I know that probably doesn't mean much to you right now, but I am. I never planned for this to happen. The rational part of me recognized his sincerity. But the wounded part wanted to snap back. I never planned for this to happen either, yet here we are. Instead, I remained silent, letting him talk. She told me a few months ago that things were difficult at home. He continued. I believed her, but I should have asked her if she was sure this was how she wanted to handle it. He paused as if searching for the right words. I didn't push her for a timeline. I never expected her to come to me and say it was all finalized, that she was leaving you, that she wanted us to be, well, married. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I braced my elbows on the table, leaning closer so I could speak without raising my voice. You're telling me you got married on a whim? That you didn't see this coming? His face twisted with regret. It wasn't like that. She was adamant. She said she'd been drifting from you for years, that she felt you were too preoccupied with. Well, I'm not trying to blame you. I believed her because I love her. Because she seemed so certain. I gritted my teeth at the word love. He spoke it so casually, like it was a justification. In a way, maybe it was. You love her, I echoed flatly. Congratulations. Now I'm supposed to what? Hand her over with a bow on top? He closed his eyes briefly. I'm not expecting your blessing. I want you to know I never set out to hurt you. She said if we did it quickly it would be cleaner. Less drawn out. Cleaner for who? I retorted, a tremor running through my voice. My composure threatened to crack. I could feel the stares of nearby patrons, could sense their curiosity about the tense conversation at this corner booth. Despite my anger, I kept my tone low, no sense making a spectacle out of my grief. David's expression grew pained. I'm sorry, he repeated, and I believed that in some twisted way he meant it. I wish there was a better way to do this. But she wants a divorce and I guess, it's happening. I told her I'd meet you because I thought we might clear the air, or at least, He trailed off, seemingly unsure of how to finish that sentence. Clear the air, I murmured, bitterness wrapping around each syllable. As if that's possible right now. He swallowed hard. The silence stretched, punctuated by the clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversation around us. I wanted to get up and walk out, but something rooted me to that seat. Maybe I needed this confrontation to confirm that my life had irrevocably changed, that no amount of denial would fix what had been broken. You don't owe me anything, David said gently. If there's anything you need to know, or any question you have, I'll do my best to answer. She said you might want closure. Closure. The word grated on my nerves. Could a single conversation with the man who'd supplanted me provide closure for a decade of marriage? For the heartbreak that had blindsided me just yesterday? I rubbed my temple, feeling a headache form behind my eyes. I wanted answers, but each question threatened to rip me apart. How long have you two been seeing each other? Did she ever love me? Did she plan every detail of this betrayal, or was it as sudden as she claimed? My pride demanded silence. Why bare my vulnerabilities to this stranger? In the end, I managed a single question. Did she ever mention trying counseling or working things out? Or was it always just, you? He looked away, guilt pooling in his gaze. She said she tried to talk to you, but you were too busy or dismissive. Maybe that was just her perspective. I don't know. I do know she felt alone, and when I came into the picture. He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I'm not blaming you. I just think she convinced herself that your marriage was already over. A hollow ache spread in my chest. Dismissive. Had I been? I tried to recall the last few months, the subtle changes in our household. I'd been working longer hours. I'd been stressed, less attentive. But had I truly pushed her away enough to drive her into another man's arms? The question lodged in my throat, refusing to dissolve. David pushed his chair back slightly, sensing maybe that we were nearing a breaking point. Look, I'm not sure anything else I say will help. She wants you to know she'll be filing for divorce soon, and that she... He paused, choosing his words carefully. She hopes you'll sign without a fight so it can be done quickly. Rage flared. My fists clenched under the table. Sign without a fight. So everything can be cleaner. Right. I shook my head, letting out a humorless laugh. She has some nerve. You both do. He nodded, as though acknowledging my right to be furious. For a moment, I thought he might stand up and leave. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper. He placed it on the table, not quite meeting my eyes. That's my number. If you ever want to talk or, I don't know, get clarification, you can call me. I promise I'm not your enemy. I just love her and she chose me. I stared at the paper, a surge of conflicting emotions crashing inside me. Betrayal, sadness, even a flicker of pity for a man stuck in the middle of this twisted scenario. Finally, I scoffed quietly, taking the slip of paper and shoving it into my jacket pocket. Thanks, I said, the sarcasm evident. I'll keep that in mind. David rose, hesitated, then extended a hand as if for a handshake. I couldn't bring myself to accept that gesture, so I just stared at him until he dropped his arm. With a sad nod, he murmured a final apology and left. I watched him exit the cafe, stepping back into the sunlight, into the future my wife had chosen for herself. I remained seated, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. My gaze darted around the room, taking in the curious glances from strangers. The waitress approached cautiously, asking if I needed anything. I opened my mouth to say no, but decided maybe I did need something. A moment to gather myself, to breathe. I'll have a coffee, I said, voice strained but steady. As I sat there waiting for the coffee to arrive, I felt the weight of everything pressed down at once. My wife was gone. She was legally tying herself to another man, and all I had left were questions, regrets, and the mocking civility of a conversation that had changed nothing. Yet, beneath the devastation, a tiny ember of resolve flickered. If this was real, if it was happening, then I had to face it head-on. No matter how humiliating or painful, I needed to figure out how to reclaim my life, piece by excruciating piece. The waitress returned with a steaming cup, and I took a slow sip, letting the bitterness ground me. I realized that in the swirl of heartbreak, one thing was clear. I was no longer the person I'd been yesterday. The foundation of my world had shifted. Perhaps, in time, I'd discover who I could become in the aftermath. But for now, all I could do was sit with the pain, the shock, and the flicker of determination that told me I wasn't defeated. Not yet. I stayed at that cafe far longer than I'd planned, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the echoes of a conversation that had already ended. Outside, people came and went, hurrying past the windows with their own urgent concerns, errands, appointments, lunches to enjoy. I realized with a jolt that I was still functioning in slow motion, as though the world beyond my personal disaster had no right to keep spinning. Yet there it was, moving on without me. In a way, it was sobering. A quiet reminder that as monumental as my heartbreak felt, life was still carrying on. By the time I left my seat, the lunch crowd had thinned. I paid my bill, tucked David's phone number deeper into my jacket pocket, and stepped out into the afternoon light. A strange calm settled over me. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance or even numbness, it was more like a fragile clarity. I still burned with anger and betrayal, but I felt a dull awareness that nothing would change by lashing out blindly. She'd already made her decision, and David, whether I liked him or not, seemed earnest in whatever twisted loyalty he felt toward her. The real question was, what would I do next? That was when the tears came. Not loud, racking sobs, just a silent wetness that blurred the lines of traffic and pedestrians. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, letting strangers flow around me. My heart hurt in a deep, primal way I'd never experienced, and yet a part of me recognized that this was necessary. This pain was the cost of loving someone so completely, only to find she had removed herself from my life with surgical precision. When the tears finally stopped, I felt exhausted but marginally more grounded. I realized I needed to go home, no matter how empty it felt. The moment I opened the front door, I was hit by the stillness of the house. It looked the same, but it felt foreign, like a place I'd once visited in a dream. Her absence was everywhere. Her favorite throw blanket was gone, leaving a bare patch on the couch. The small collection of her beloved novels, missing from the bookshelf, left a gaping hole in the middle of my literary chaos. Even the little decorative trinkets she used to collect, ceramic owls of all things, were nowhere to be seen. In their absence, the walls themselves seemed to echo with a strange emptiness, as though the house was grieving too. I sank onto the couch and buried my face in my hands, trying to decide what to do first. My thoughts scrolled through every worst-case scenario: the divorce, the logistics, the financial splits, the legal battles. But the emotional toll felt more pressing. I knew I couldn't survive this alone, not in one piece. Pulling out my phone, I scrolled through my contacts, landed on my sister's name and pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, her familiar voice instantly soothing. "Hey big brother, everything okay?" I hesitated, wondering how to compress the insanity of the last 24 hours into a single answer. "No," I finally said, and my voice cracked. "It's not." That was all it took. She dropped whatever she was doing and drove over. An hour later, she was at my doorstep with a grocery bag full of takeout containers and a box of tissues. Her hug was warm, comforting, and silent, exactly what I needed. She didn't say "I told you so," or "you'll get over it," or any of the cliches. Instead, she plunked down next to me on the couch, opened one of the takeout boxes, and just waited. I started talking, haltingly at first, then in a rush, about how my wife asked for a divorce at breakfast, about this new husband, about David. My sister listened with her full attention, her face etched with sympathy. When I finished, I was trembling with the aftermath of having laid everything out. She rested a hand on my shoulder and said, "You've been blindsided, and that's awful. But you can't let this define you forever." We ate in relative silence after that, the smell of Chinese noodles and sweet spicy sauces oddly comforting in the desolate house. Finally she said, "I think you need help, legal help for sure, but maybe therapy too. Someone objective who can guide you through this?" I nodded. The idea of dragging my heartbreak into a lawyer's office or a therapist's chair felt overwhelming, but I knew she was right. I needed professional help to navigate the impending divorce, and possibly more help to untangle the emotional knots that threatened to strangle me. She jotted down a couple of recommendations, and for the first time since my wife had dropped her bombshell, I felt something like faint hope flicker in my chest. Maybe I wasn't doomed to drown in this after all. Before leaving, my sister insisted on helping me straighten up the house. We went through the rooms together, boxing up some of my wife's old belongings that she'd carelessly left behind, like a few stray sweaters in the closet. Each item was a new pang, a reminder of her abrupt exodus and secret second life. But with each box taped shut, I felt a tiny bit of control return, like I was actively dismantling the vestiges of a lie and reclaiming my space, however painful it might be. When my sister finally headed out, I thanked her with a tight hug, feeling a surge of gratitude for her unwavering presence. In the days that followed, I floated through a fog of phone calls and appointments. I found a reputable divorce attorney, an older woman with a sharp mind and a surprisingly gentle demeanor. She listened intently to my situation, scribbling notes as I recounted the surreal chain of events. At one point I mentioned David and she raised an eyebrow. Well, that's a new twist, she said, trying to keep her tone light. I've heard of many scenarios, but rarely where the new partner tries to have a civil meeting with the current spouse. I shrugged, feeling the heaviness return. Civil is one word for it. Bizarre is another. She gave a wry smile. Indeed. We'll handle the legalities. I'm sure your wife has her own counsel. In the meantime, try not to let this consume your every waking moment. That's easier said than done, but it's important. You have rights, and you deserve respect in this process. After leaving her office, I booked an appointment with a therapist recommended by my sister. The first session was nerve-wracking, but the therapist's calm, empathetic approach helped me start sorting through the jumble of emotions: rage, betrayal, self-doubt, and an undercurrent of heartbreak I was trying desperately to contain. He encouraged me to write a journal to document my feelings. I was skeptical at first, but found myself scribbling page after page in the evenings, the pen becoming a lifeline when my mind spun into dark corridors. Life began to take on a new, if shaky, rhythm. Work provided a distraction: numbers to crunch, emails to send, projects to oversee. Colleagues offered sympathy in hushed tones, but I kept the details sparse. My wife moved out. We're divorcing. That's all I could say without tearing up or exploding in misplaced anger. Most of them were supportive in the mild, careful way acquaintances often are, offering help if I needed it, though I never really took them up on it. Through it all, David's phone number loomed in my mind like an unanswered question. I found myself fishing out that slip of paper late at night, staring at it, wondering if I should call. Part of me wanted to accuse him, to force him to acknowledge my pain. Another part was curious. Was my wife happy? Did she regret anything? But each time, the thought of hearing his voice again sent a jolt of nausea through me. Talking to David again, I concluded, would only serve to pick at the scab of a wound that needed time to heal. One evening, though, the phone rang and I recognized his number on the screen. My heart kicked into overdrive. Should I answer? I debated letting it go to voicemail. But then a strange calm settled in. Maybe it was time. I picked up. Hello? Hey, David said cautiously. I'm sorry to call. I just wanted to check if you were all right. She mentioned you're seeing an attorney. I wanted to see if there was anything I could clarify. Or if you wanted to talk about. I cut him off, my voice surprisingly controlled. I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. The attorneys can handle the details. You and I don't need to discuss anything else. The finality in my tone surprised even me. There was a pause. Understood, he said, a tightness in his voice. I wanted to make sure there was no animosity that could get out of hand. Animosity. The word almost made me laugh. You helped shatter my marriage and you're worried about things getting out of hand? But I swallowed the sarcasm. I'm not a violent man. I'm not looking for revenge. I just need to move on. He exhaled softly as if relieved. I'm really sorry. For what it's worth. Without replying, I ended the call. My hands shook afterward, but I felt a rush of relief, like I'd slammed a door I'd been afraid to shut. I'm not looking for revenge, I'd said, and to my own surprise, I meant it. My wife had hurt me in a way I never imagined, but living with bitterness would only make the wound fester. I needed to heal, not spiral into endless resentment. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. Maybe she and David wanted it cleaner, as that word had come up before. My attorney negotiated on my behalf, ensuring I wasn't left destitute. It was painful but less messy than it could have been. No drawn-out courtroom drama. Just signatures on documents that felt both too official and heartbreakingly abrupt. In the end, I walked away with a settlement that let me keep the house and some savings while she walked away, entirely. Weeks blurred into months as I adapted to life on my own. The house, once full of her presence, slowly became a place I could tolerate, even enjoy in brief moments. I rearranged furniture to break old patterns, painted a few rooms in colors she'd have hated. Each small change felt like reclaiming a corner of my life. Therapy sessions continued, guiding me through the minefield of post-divorce loneliness, helping me recognize that her leaving wasn't a condemnation of my entire being. It was a choice she made based on her own needs, or maybe her own illusions. One cool autumn evening, I found myself sitting on the front porch, sipping tea and watching the sky turn orange. The smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke drifted on a gentle breeze. I closed my eyes and realized for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet peace. The ache of loss was still there, faint and pulsing, but it no longer overwhelmed me. I had survived the hardest conversation of my life. I'd faced her new husband, heard his apologies, fended off his attempts to stay involved in some convoluted sense of guilt or duty. More importantly, I was finding a path forward, step by painful step. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of the life we once had: lazy Sunday mornings, spontaneous weekend trips, shared laughter at silly inside jokes. I'd wake up feeling hollow, missing what could have been if she'd chosen differently. But as the days passed, those dreams began to sting less. I remembered the warmth with nostalgia instead of desperation. That part of my life is over, I'd remind myself. But not all of me is over. I was still here, still breathing, and the future, for all its uncertainty, was mine to shape. By winter, I decided to reach out to friends I'd let slip away during the last chaotic year. We grabbed coffees, caught up, and gradually I began filling my calendar with small social outings. Movie nights, group dinners, volunteer projects at a local shelter. My sister teased me once, saying I was turning into a social butterfly. In reality, I was rediscovering what it felt like to connect with people who had no agenda other than genuine friendship. My isolation receded, and with it, the worst of the self-doubt. I was discovering that I had value outside of being someone's husband. One afternoon, nearly a year to the day after she demanded a divorce, I found myself looking at a photograph, one from our honeymoon in Italy. We stood by a sunlit vineyard, smiling wide, the future a bright promise. For a moment, I felt a pang of sorrow for the man in that picture, so unaware of the heartbreak ahead. Yet I also felt gratitude. Gratitude that I had loved wholeheartedly, and gratitude that I had learned I could survive even the deepest betrayal. I tucked the photo into an old album, determined not to let it define me. My phone buzzed with a message from a new friend inviting me to a small get-together that evening. Without hesitation, I texted back, "Yes, I'll be there." A soft smile tugged at my lips as I locked my phone. I was still piecing myself together, but each moment of moving forward felt a little easier than the one before. I thought back to my final conversation with David, to the stilted apology he offered. I realized I no longer felt the urge to confront or appease him. We were both living our separate lives now, he with her, me on my own road. The past, painful as it was, had lost its power to paralyze me. I could finally see that sometimes people leave, sometimes they forge new bonds, and we're left to adapt in ways we never anticipated. It wasn't fair, but it was reality, and acknowledging that was strangely liberating. That evening, before heading out to meet my friends, I stood in front of the mirror one last time, adjusting my jacket. My reflection looked different, older, a bit scarred, but calmer too. I thought about everything that had transpired: the shock of her announcement, the agonizing realization that she had a new husband, the excruciating confrontation where I'd had to maintain my composure while my world collapsed. And then, the slow, grueling climb back to myself. "Here's to new beginnings," I said quietly to the empty room, my voice steady. I switched off the lights, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.